This is obviously put on by the Master Gardeners. I'm not sure if there's been a little blurb, but we are a community of volunteers who've gone through training to help people learn the scientific ways to garden. And we're sort of associated through UC Davis's ag program. So there's a lot of good information behind the organization, and we're a conduit. This is container gardening, and I have a container gardening business. I've had it for over 5 years now, mostly doing ornamental things, but I do have clients who have raised vegetable beds or citrus in pots, that kind of thing. And a few people cutting gardens are getting popular. So all of these things will apply generally across the board. They're the best basics. And then, you know, you either tweak them or maybe a particular plant will need a specific extra information. But hopefully this will get you started. The advantages of container gardening are that you can do it really anywhere. You can do it on a balcony, on a wall or a fence, certainly even in a garden, like in the borders. If you've got an open space and you just want to seasonally change something, you can just plop a pot in. It's actually a great way to add some color without digging up the dirt. You don't have to worry about, you know, the dirt. Is it right? Is it not? Is it contaminated or got too much concrete? Was a dump site for something? And with containers, you can move them around. And I'll talk a little bit about this, but there are ways with containers to take advantage of your own personal microclimates, which you can't do in the ground. So I think that's one of the really great things about container gardening. Also, it's not really expensive. You can spend as much as you want, but you can start with a basic terracotta or plastic pot and go from there. You don't need a lot of equipment. So these are just examples. All of these basics will apply no matter what you grow. It's sort of the same steps, the same basics. Succulents, indoor plants, outdoor plants. First thing is really to understand your environment. And there are a lot of things. I know it's exciting. Usually you think, I'm going to plant flowers in a pot by my front door, or I want a succulent arrangement or a lemon bush. But really what you need to start with is the area where you're going to put this container. What's it like? Is there sun? Is there shade? Think about that not only for the summer, but the winter, because it can be full sun in the summer and full shade in the winter, and that may affect the ability of the plant to survive. There are apps. There are, I think, free apps like sun shade kind of calculators. I wish I don't have my phone. I just downloaded one for free, and it's great. I use it all the time. I was just with the clients, and right now it's kind of shady, but in July and June it's full sun and there's a lot of stone, so that affects what we would put in those. You want to think about the wind. Is there a lot? Where it comes from? Is there stone, concrete, any of those hard surfaces really absorb the heat and then release it at night or reflect it back? That's really great for things like vegetables usually, but it can also burn some more sensitive plants. Do you have, I don't want to guess, deer? Deer are a problem even with containers. Rabbits will jump up there. Squirrels have been a big problem the last couple of years. Raccoons, really, that's a more vegetable thing. They see something they want to eat and they go and get it. Foot traffic. Who's walking by? You want to know about that one might they bump the plant? If you've got something prickly like a beautiful agave or a holly bush, will people get their clothes snagged on it? Will it get scratched? Or if you're growing delicious strawberries, are you really close to the sidewalk where the public can come by and help themselves to an afternoon snack? Afternoon available water. I'll talk about hand watering and irrigation, but you know, is it there? Do you have to lug something there? Is it complicated? Is it easy? And those of you with balconies or roof gardens, you really want to make sure you know what the maximum weight is. And I don't have a great mathematical formula for figuring out how heavy a pot is, but I do know that a gallon of water, and you'd be surprised how much water soil will hold, can be over 7 pounds. I think it's almost 8 pounds a gallon. So when you start having several pots with lots of water in them, and especially if they were heavy pots to begin with, that's a lot of weight. And so I think that's just something to check with either the management or, you know, maybe there's some information there. This is just an example of sort of microclimates within the garden. I mean, we hear about, you know, San Francisco versus Half Moon Bay versus San Jose, but this is even within the garden. So this is a lavender on the left-hand side there. And it's in full sun. The sun's beating down, that shows it. And then there's all this heat that gets bounced back on there. Well, that's going to affect it in a couple of ways. One, it helps it grow perhaps better, especially if that's not normally a super hot area. If, you know, you're just out in the yard. So that extra heat helps it. Two, it will evaporate more quickly or dry out more quickly. So you probably need a little more water. Mulch, mulch is great in the yard. It helps retain heat. I'm not a big fan of mulching in pots because you really want to keep it away from the trunks or the stems. Otherwise it can cause rot and a lot of pathogens can get in there. And so it's really hard in a pot. You don't get much benefit from that mulch. It's better maybe to just have plants in there that kind of shade the whole thing. On the other side, you see that shade. Well, water might last a little longer. Also, the direction of the wind, if it went from left to right, you see that little curlicue there. That's because wind tends to make these little eddies right on the other side of structures. So that might affect the placing of your pots. Anyway, this is just a handy little thing, not only for pots, but for anywhere in the garden. And then you want to think about what's the goal? Is this for decoration? Is it for privacy? Is it for food? Ease of access. Is it easy to get to? Is it easy to reach the plants? If you're trying to plant especially edibles and you want to be able to, you know, harvest them or pinch them or whatever it is you need to do, you don't want to have to be reaching too far over something. Think about the space for the mature version. That affects not only the pot you pick, but also the space around it. And then for flowers and for edibles, you want to think about what quantity you're looking for. If you're actually trying to feed your family, that's many more plants versus just trying to have fun, you know, and maybe have one tomato bush or grow some green beans on a trellis or something. So that does, you want to answer all these questions before you go out and buy stuff. When you go to pick your plants, and this is for edibles, really this is true for everyone, pick what works for your microclimate. The nursery is going to have things that are going to work for a lot of areas around them, because people have different microclimates. If you live in San Mateo, generally we're a mild summer place. Down on the flats and some of those places, you have some really hot areas, and you can get away with, I'm using tomatoes for the example because tomatoes are the most popular sort of gateway plant. You can grow some bigger things, bigger tomatoes. If you're up by, say, 280 or the College of San Mateo, or some of those cooler areas, you're going to stick to things like cherry tomatoes or things that are, you know, maybe the size of a golf ball or a little bigger. You're not going to get big beefsteak tomatoes. If you live somewhere, and also you're not going to get really hot peppers to get that full hot flavor. So hot peppers, they need hot sun. Bell peppers, that kind of thing, you can grow more or less anywhere, but just keep that in mind. If you're in an area and you're mostly shady, you can still grow herbs. You can grow a lot of leafy greens. I'm going to stick with the greens for the moment. Asian greens, not just lettuces, kales, that kind of thing. And then you can also grow things like, this is a watermelon, this picture, it's a little baby watermelon. And when you're thinking about growing something like a watermelon in a container, you probably want to pick a variety that's a smaller, a dwarf version. One, it may not have the root space to grow as well as it could if it were in the ground. Two, for most of our area, we don't really have that deep heat that, say, a watermelon likes. I live in the foggier, cooler areas, sort of up by 280, and I've grown cantaloupe and watermelon, but I end up with ones the size of like a softball, and they were delicious, but I wasn't getting any jumbo watermelons up here. So again, it's back to your microclimates, because you're going to put a lot of effort and have a lot of energy and hopes for this stuff, and you want it to work. Oh, and I will say, going back to buying things that work for this area, there are plants that actually need a certain amount of chill hours, which means so many hours under, I think, 32 degrees, or so, I can't remember exactly, but certain cherry trees, which I've grown in big containers, but peonies don't always bloom well. Certain peonies, if they don't get that cool winter. So that's something else you want to find out before you buy something. When you get there, there's tags and all this information, but it's not always translated. So what does full sun mean? Generally, it's 6 hours plus of direct sunlight, not just, well, it's sunny out there, but you can't cast a shadow. This is basically 6 hours of sun hitting the plant. Part sun, I find part sun, part shade confusing. Like, do they mean the same thing? Well, actually, they're two different things. Part sun, 4 to 6 hours. Part shade is 1.5 to 4 hours. For part shade things, they could probably take 4 hours of morning sun, or maybe 5 hours, like from sun up to, 11 or something, but they won't take hot afternoon sun. So a part shade plant does not want, even 3 hours of that hot late in the day sun. Full shade is 1 to 3 hours. Dappled sun, they're full shade, you'd think would mean, oh, I could grow that under a redwood tree, where it's really dark up under the trunk. There are very few things that grow in really, really complete dark. Full shade really does mean usually there's a little dapple coming through or reflection off buildings or something like that. Oh, here it is. Chill hours are usually the number of hours to produce flowers or fruit between 32 and 45 degrees. So there you go. So I'm going to do a little bit about what to look for in a plant. I mean, this is for any kind of gardening, but my feeling is I can kill the plant all by myself. I do not need any help. It's really important to get the best plant you can get. And I know what it's like to go to this nursery or the store and you really want whatever it is, red or certain kind of red rose. And when you get there, the only one they have left has a really bad shape. They're probably bare root. It just doesn't look good. Maybe it doesn't have a nice set of roots coming out from it. You could buy it and you could try to nurse it back to health, but it's really better to start at the top and try to maintain it than start at the bottom and have to work your way up. So what is it you want to look for? You want to look for a good distribution of white roots. That can be hard, especially for bigger plants. But I often, with a 4-inch plant, will first look at the bottom. If there's a ton of roots coming out, that plant is probably root bound. If there's a few poking out, I'm not too worried about that, especially if I see new white growth. But some places when they water, the plants sit in the water and the roots are all just sitting there in it. The ones that have come out the bottom of the plant, those can begin to rot. So you really kind of want to avoid too many roots coming out. If you squeeze it and it's very, very tight, a lot of times that also means it's root bound. The plant's under stress. It may transplant well, and as you get experience, you kind of know what you can do that with and what you can't. In fact, I've got ornamental cabbage and kale, and the place I get them from, they are always jam-packed. It's incredible, the roots, but they transplant beautifully. I mean, you rip up the roots and they're good to go. Other things I wouldn't do that with. It's nice if you can see signs of growth. And then, oh, and with 4-inch, I kind of squeeze the side of the plastic container to see if I can see in there. If I'm concerned, I might take a sniff. If it smells bad, if there's a sulfur or gassy smell. Good leaf color, is it or growing in the way it kind of should, and hopefully signs of new growth, if that's appropriate. If you're buying a bare root apple tree, you're not going to really see any signs of life, but you can look for overall shape, distribution of roots, how the bark looks, etc. You don't want to get anything with disease on it. One leaf, well, you could snap it off, but if you start to see it all over or signs of pests, that may have been there for a while, because usually places are pretty good about catching that stuff, but you do want to be concerned. This one picture of with the yellow arrow, that's called girdling, where the roots can go round and round. They can, for trees mostly, or large shrubs, it can actually strangle the trunk and cut off circulation. So you want to avoid those if you can. And if you see dieback on branches, that's the kind of thing where it's like black and decayed or desiccated partway down a branch, and then it starts to look normal. That can be a few different problems that can transfer to other parts of the plant. So you're better off waiting for another location or till they get a new stock and buy a healthier plant. For vegetables, You don't really want to go in buying something that looks like this. I mean, if they're bigger than a gallon, if they've up-potted them, then maybe. But by the time this little 4-inch pepper has started producing those plants, it's really going to have stopped most of its overall growth. It's stunted. You will never get the production out of it you would have if you planted it earlier, if it was a younger plant. And then for flowers, if you really want a long blooming season in the pot, the best choice is something with a few buds in it, maybe a few blossoms, but then you're going to have that whole month, couple months, whatever it is, of blooms, as opposed to that last beautiful flower sitting there where it may be half gone and you've missed half of its life. And I think I'll talk about it later, but just in case I don't, for flowers, especially in container pots, annuals are your hardcore bloomers. They will go and go and go 3, 4, sometimes even 5 months around here. So it's a little bit less of an issue looking for the buds already, although it's nice because sometimes when they don't even have the buds, especially annuals, they barely have any roots, and you go to take them out of the pot and all the dirt falls off and the 2 or 3 fragile little roots have broken off, and then you're stuck with sometimes a dead plant. Sometimes it'll keep going. So it is better if they've got a little maturity. Perennials are really the ones where you want to watch out and make sure they've got buds, but not a ton of flowers, because perennials will put on a beautiful show, and something like echinacea, the coneflower, or black-eyed Susans, which you may have seen recently, it's that season, you can prune those as the flowers die, deadhead them, and then you get more and more blooms, although at some point it stops. But you don't want to have missed a lot of the perennials show. Selecting a container. They come in every configuration you can imagine. Let me see what's the next one. Okay. I will just say here, my thing about metal is that you should line it with something, because if it gets really, really hot, it can burn the roots. So what we've just used things like styrofoam or burlap, something that's, you know, kind of environmentally safe, either not going to fall apart or, you know, a couple layers of burlap are pretty thick, at least for a while. You want to be careful of that. If let me see if there's anything here. Let me just talk. Things like stone, terracotta, concrete are great because they do really retain that heat that you may want and release it through the evening. So can the black nursery pots. If you're just trying to grow some vegetables and you don't care what they look like, black nursery pots let you start a little sooner because that soil's warmed up faster and stays a little higher than other things. The different materials affect evaporation. You know, the stone, the terracotta, it seems like the water gets sucked out a little faster. Something glazed, not so much. I do not like self-watering pots. I still haven't figured out. They all have this fatal flaw eventually. It sounds really great, but the bottom line is the water ends up sitting at the bottom of the pot. And anytime, you know, and the idea is, oh, the roots, it can kind of wick up. Well, the biggest problem is eventually those roots grow into that water and then they will rot, and rot begets rot. I mean, once it starts at the bottom, it will go up through the top. And we've had, you know, really mature bushes we've had to pull out or other things because they sat in water, whether it was a saucer or something like these self-watering pots. So I know they have new ones out all the time, but ultimately that's a big problem because the roots will find that water. They're going to want it. They're going to grow towards it, but then they're stuck in the water. The other thing is when you've got some small plants up here, it's hard on Zoom to do this. I'm a very hands person. And the water sits down here and it's supposed to wick up. It doesn't really get all the way up to those little roots of things like annuals and stuff. I would suggest, you know, just watering. And if you need help with that, you can't, you know, you don't want to hand water, you can set up drip irrigation. I have seen those bulbs that people use, you know, those glass bulbs that are so pretty at arts and crafts fairs and supposedly they work. I think there's a lot of other things you can do. Yeah, not big on those watering pots. You also might want to consider getting a little movable tray for your, I'm sure there's a logical name for that, which I can't think of at the moment, to move your pots around. Pots are heavy, especially the stone that, I mean, concrete, you're not moving. They're going to be set somewhere and that's that for the most part. But they are heavy and you may want to move them, whether it's access to furniture, you move things around, or you're trying to follow the sun as it changes over the seasons for whatever reason. If you think you're going to move pots and they aren't out of a plastic or something lighter, you may want to find some of these little rollers to put them on. You can get those, I'm pretty sure, like at Home Depot or Lowe's or somewhere like that, probably in the summer more than the winter. But for food, a lot of the things you buy from the store are fine to grow food in. You don't want to use, I mean, you do want to use untreated redwood, teak, or cedar if you're going to build a raised bed. You don't want to use the treated stuff. You don't want to use a container you don't know the history of because you don't know what somebody put in there. And I know there's all these cute on Instagram and all the other social media containers with things coming out heads, or, you know, they're little dolly shopping or little dolly carts that people have grown flowers out of. Flowers, all that stuff, that's fine. If you want to experiment with that, that can be a lot of fun, but not food, because whatever is lacquering those things, painting those things, that leaches into the soil. And I'm by no means really knowledgeable on that, but I think that can be a dangerous thing. Also, the plastics with the numbers 3, 6, and 7, and I don't even know if you see those anymore, but they can leach. So you want to be careful. Now, I just told you about those plastics, but for metal containers, and now it's very frustrating. There's some really nice containers made by Pottery Barn and Restoration Hardware and all these, a few other places that are kind of a fiberglass, stone dust, something melange. And they're kind of sturdy and they're very attractive. They now suggest that you put a liner in those to protect the pot. Well, they don't sell a liner. They haven't gotten around to creating one. So I'm not sure for food what would be a better, you know, what's a safe option. I might just use a pot like a terracotta, a glaze, something I already bought to grow food in, or the wood, rather than deal with metal or one of those containers that suggests a liner. This picture with the cans, you know, I guess that's okay if you ate the soup or the tomatoes or whatever was out of them. But at some point, all those kind of things rust, and I think you're better off starting with the right item. This is really important. Size does matter. Correct size matters. You can't put you could put a redwood, a small redwood in a pot. It would never grow into a real redwood tree. It would be like a bonsai. And you'd have to root prune it and do all those things. But generally, if you want something to grow to its full glorious size and production, you kind of need to know how big the roots are going to be and plan for that. So this is really in relation to edibles, but for peppers and eggplants, and some small patio tomatoes, they're called patio tomatoes actually. You might get away with a 5-gallon nursery container, and I'm using nursery containers. There's a little bit of, there's some size information there too, but a lot of people kind of spatially know what that means. For most tomatoes and squash, you really want something big, bigger than you think. 22 inches deep is more than my hands will fit in this frame, and wide. And even that, because I grow all my squash and my tomatoes in containers, even that gets root bound after a while, but it works pretty well. You can get pretty much a full season. Things like herbs, carrots, lettuce, and all of that, they just need, lettuce could probably grow in shorter than 12 inches, but for carrots, beets, some of those things, sending the tuber down to grow, you need that room. Don't forget the feet. So I mentioned earlier about the saucer. I don't love saucers, not only because they retain the water that the roots go through the drainage hole and get into, but because mosquitoes are a problem around here. We do have West Nile disease, and they only need a 1/4 inch of water to grow in. So if you really want a saucer, you've got a brand new stone patio that isn't sealed heavily enough. Some stone you can do that with, some you can't. I understand the interest in a saucer, but I would really suggest that you monitor the waters, that you don't get a large amount, and then you should suck it out with a turkey baster. And I know that sounds crazy, but that's really what you should do. Just putting a pot on the ground may not have it drain. This is actually a Flagstaff patio, that first one on the left. So you would think with the different variations in the Flagstaff, there wouldn't be a tight sealed contact between the pot and the ground. And there's a hole there. And yet it's hard to see a little bit, but there's a reflection. That water was after a rain, and that was like 12 hours later, still sitting there. So don't assume your pot is draining just because it's on the ground. You can use anything. I've got, those little feet that are, the little child's rear end. We use tile from the home stores. I just get a sheet of tiles that they might use for a bathroom, like, 1x1 squares or 2x2, something like that. And then just slide them in so that it's a 1/4 inch of room. That's enough to get irrigation up through if that's what you want to do, but it's also perfect for drainage. I like those little tiles because you can kind of move them around to make sure if the ground isn't level, that you can get the pot level. This one is still one people think that you need pots. Rocks in the bottom of your pot to help with drainage. That does not work. That actually is contrary. There's something about the capillary action that the potting soil at the bottom, as it's draining, and then it runs into the rocks, it actually holds on to a certain amount of water down there. So you think it's all drained out, but it's actually kind of wet at the very bottom. And so roots get soggy, unhappy. They're also cheated out of a certain amount of growing room. And all the commercial potting soils have great drainage. The other thing is, I have had more clients' pots when we go there the first time with the rocks in them, and plants have died, and the rocks have shifted and closed up the hole. Even sharp angled rocks or whatever it is, they just somehow manage over time and everything to block them. So it's really not great. If you want to put it on top as a mulch, it's great with succulents, even some California natives, that's great, but it does not belong in your pot. If you have a big tall pot and you are only going to grow something relatively small on top and you don't want to fill the whole thing with dirt, you can go ahead and put, or you want to keep it stable from falling over, you could put rocks in. But what you want to do then is plant your thing in a smaller pot that fits inside. So you're basically just inserting a pot into that other container. You can put, you can either have plants growing over the edge to kind of hide the differentiation, or a little, you know, dried moss or something like that. But, you know, that's really what you should do. You should have like a real separate container in a container. Potting soil. You want to use potting soil. Stuff from your yard could have insects, pathogens, weeds, all kinds, you know, contaminants, whatever. Also, potting soil is already blended for good nutrition, good drainage, all of that stuff. We always use organic fertilizer. We use organic fertilizer. We always use organic potting soil. There are lots of brands. I mean, there's $20 a bag brands, and there's, you know, $9 a bag brand, organic brands, and you can get them everywhere. And I think they're all generally pretty good. We've tried probably tried all of them at one point or another. Some have mycorrhizal fungi. They may or may not be alive, but what mycorrhizal fungi do is they're fungi that form a relationship with the roots to help the roots attract food and nutrition out of the soil. So they almost, you know, they're little helpers. And in return, the roots exude something that the fungi happen to like. So that's, you know, that's something nice to have. I'm not sure you have to have it. It depends, I guess, on what you're growing and if it's long-term, short-term. We do a lot of 3-month change every season planting, so I don't necessarily look for that. But if I was going to have something in longer, I might think that was great. Also, some of the organic fertilizers have that kind of thing. Several of the brands have a water retention element, whether it's, I think yucca juice was one for a while in one of the brands, or coconut core is actually a good one that's been added. And they do, I think, help retain the water a little more than those without it. I think at least in the San Mateo area, most of the nurseries, I think I shop at all of them, including Home Depot. I think most of the brands are pretty good at retaining water. But if you in particular want to really save all your water and not have it drain out, you might look for one of those. Or you could buy some coconut coir and mix it in to a degree. You will see all kinds of blends and this and that, and that gets a little confusing. The legitimate other soil you really would need is an acid planting mix. If you're doing things like blueberries, azaleas, rhododendrons, things that are acid-loving plants. And you might have to look it up to know if your plant is an acid-loving plant. It's about the soil pH, and the right pH level is critical because it affects the plant's ability to absorb nutrition in the soil. You can't sort of fudge that. If you've already planted one of these plants and you didn't use acid planting mix, you can use acidic, fertilizer for acid-loving plants. That would be the other way to sort of help. It helps with the getting the pH right. Succulent cactus mix. They do like fast draining stuff. Most people plant succulents and then never water them. Succulents need water, and they do change over time, and they need tending to, a little pinching, a little whatever. So we sometimes just use regular potting soil. If it's a really big thing, I would add a few handfuls of perlite, which is that white stuff, or vermiculite, which is another thing that helps with drainage. But I don't usually go out and buy a separate succulent cactus mix. I just get one of the potting soils and kind of maybe loosen it, and also keep the soil kind of loose. I don't pack it down in the pot. Sometimes you end up with all these bags of stuff. You really don't need it. And that's actually mostly true with fertilizer. I will admit, I don't know when you use fish meal and bone meal and kelp, whatever. I tend to stick with the more packaged things, the sort of all-in-ones. And I heard from people at a nursery that the fertilizer people make all these different fertilizers, one for your citrus, one for your blueberries, and one for your flowers, and one for your grass, because people will buy all those different fertilizers. You don't actually need them all to be successful. You need a all-purpose. You might need a bud and bloom, or something like that to promote buds and blooms and fruits, and then an acid mix. I mean, generally those are the three that you really need for any variety. Starter mix is the only other thing that I really like, and that's because I'm changing out plants a lot, and what it tends to have is a little bit of extra humic acid. Yes, humic acid, which is a bit like Gatorade to the roots and gives them a little extra energy, helps with transplant shock. I am a big fan of both of those brands, but if you're planting something in the ground or in a pot and not really changing it, then you can go ahead with whichever of the appropriate fertilizers you need. I do think that organic is really the only way to go. They've got sort of like, I would say a gourmet meal, but that's not true, because compost is more like the gourmet meal. Organic fertilizer is more like the pretty healthy, but maybe I'd fries with it, that kind of thing. And the non-organic fertilizers are more like a vitamin. So you they help, but you're not getting the full package of everything that makes you healthy. Whereas, and when I said gourmet meal, I meant healthy gourmet meal, not 6 courses of ice cream, which would be my idea for gourmet meal. So think of it that way. You really want to go with these, and you don't need to apply it all the time. Every few months is fine. Planting, this is just the basics. You know, you want to water all your, oh yeah, for containers, you really want to water all your plants before you take them out of their original containers and put them in the soil. Sometimes once they're in the soil, well, one, it helps with the shock, but two, sometimes once they're in the pot with the other things, there's a lot of air around that root ball, and it just doesn't want to get in there. Somehow, if you've already watered them and they've had just a few minutes, they don't need hours ahead of time prepped. Just we water them, and then we put the dirt in the pot and do all that, and then put them in. That seems to be plenty of time. You want to tilt them out. You don't want to yank them from the top. It's enticing to do, especially when they're a little bit stuck, but you want to squeeze the container and try to stick it on its side and maybe hit the bottom. Eventually you might, I mean, it's better to stick something in the pot and pull it out than yank on it, but you do what you have to do. You want to gently loosen roots. Things like annuals are much more forgiving, especially in little 6-packs. You can often just kind of rip those roots right apart and they can handle it. Other things probably want a bit more attention. And if they've got really thick, juicy roots, or they're tubers or something like a taproot, you want to really be careful with those. They're more sensitive to fooling with them, and you want to be careful. I like to tamp down the potting soil before I even put the plants in, not step on it and compact it to whatever, but give it a good, you know, make sure there's no big air gaps in it. Also, because after you've watered it a few times and everything's settled, all of a sudden you've got it up at this level of, you know, the top of the pot or near the top, and all of a sudden it's 4 inches lower, and that can be a problem. So it's good to give your soil a pat when you put it in. Then you want to put the plant in. You want to make sure it's got good contact. Sprinkle a little fertilizer, and you do not want to plant it too deep. It should be no deeper than the level it was at the in the nursery container. So those want to match up. You can, for larger things, some shrubs or trees, you may hear that it's good to plant high. It's actually horrible to plant low. And there's a few exceptions like tomatoes that you can usually plant deep, but generally all that water goes to the trunk, the stem, whatever, and causes root rot. Causes rot. So it is better to be slightly higher than lower. But I think in pots, because it's such a limited space, you really want to try to be at that line. Water it really well. You do want water to run out the bottom, even when you're doing it subsequently. It doesn't have to be tons of water out the bottom, but you want to make sure it's all gone through the whole container. The soil line should be about an inch below the top of the pot. And that's more for hand watering, but also, you know, or rain, so that it doesn't flow over the edges. And you really want to avoid planting during dramatic weather, mostly really hot heat, or maybe really high winds. And it's always, you know, when you've planned to do this, like in the summer, that then suddenly we have a heat wave. So if you're really stuck and you've got to get these, you've purchased something, you've got to get it in the ground, try to give them some shade for a couple of days. If you can move the pot, great. If you can't, maybe you can get a couple of poles or, you know, sticks in the soil and drape a lightweight old sheet over it, just something so it has a chance to kind of recover a little bit. This is just some little shopping tips. When you buy a 6-packs or jumbo packs, you hardly see 6-packs anymore. Generally, it's a good idea to cut the weakest ones and really just leave the healthiest one in each of those little containers. You could go with 2 maybe for certain plants. But the reason there's so many plants in those pots is because the growers want to ensure that something germinates. They also know that people like to buy pots that have lots of things in them. So if they see 3 plants, 3 zucchini plants in a 4-inch thing versus 1 zucchini plant, they're like, oh, hey, that's great. But there can be a lot of competition in there, and they may just get tangled up and not grow well. It's better to reduce the number, and it's really hard to physically tease them. And I have tried that many summers, you know, dipping them in water and separating them. Sometimes you get lucky, but usually by then I've stressed them all out and they all die. So it's better to look at how many you've got in the container, maybe keep 2, cut the weaker ones, and then plant them up. You should put in your supports at the same time as you plant your thing, whether it's dahlias or tomatoes or sweet peas. It's really hard to do it later. And yeah, it's just really hard to do later. I said those things, and I talked about mulch already. Okay, watering. You can water by hand in pots. I love to water by hand because I like to see what's going on. It's a good way to catch pests, disease early. I feel like it's, you know, for some people, it's a morning ritual kind of thing. It's best in the morning. You want to keep your hose pressure low so that mud doesn't splash everywhere, because the mud splashing actually is part of what can help get pathogens up into your leaves and problems like that. You want to water all around the container, not just in one section. And ideally not just like all over the top, but try to get in where the dirt is, get the hose down low and just sprinkle it around. There's nothing wrong with shower, but sometimes the leaves push all that water away and it never gets in close to where they are. Drip irrigation is really pretty easy once somebody explains it to you, but it keeps the water where it's needed, so it's a bit more efficient. It can come up through the pot hole as long as the hole's big enough and then your pot's raised just that 1/4 inch. You want to be careful that it can be cut if you get into your pots a lot with sharp implements. And then if it's cut, you don't always see the leak initially. Master gardeners will, in the summertime, maybe late spring, often do an irrigation class, which is great. But Urban Farmer in the city is also a wonderful place to do it. So I would say check them out, and they're really nice. I go there all the time and I still can't remember how to put certain pieces together, and they're patient. And so it's really nice to, they're just really nice. They have a lot of information online. I like the line, that you want these inline emitters, which you see in that top picture, and it's in a little device where the dirt doesn't go back in. Laser cut line is just laser cut line and it may be little slits or something that can get clogged up. This can't get clogged up that way. There can be mineral clog up from the water over time, but I mean, I've used a lot of line for years in the same containers without problems. I like the line that has the water every 6 inches so that you get several points of water going down. I don't really like the kind that kind of shoot out the water in one direction because, again, it only shoots it in one direction. Bubblers are okay, but you want at least 2, if not 3. Really, this is the most efficient way to get water where you need it. Water on one side of a root ball might keep it alive, but it isn't going to keep it happy. The water doesn't travel horizontally to the other end of the pot. And if you've got more than one plant in there, especially, they're not getting anything. So this is what I really, really recommend. This is really one of the most important things you should ever know about container gardening, that dry soil is afraid of water, basically. It all curls up on top there and then runs down the side. Often there'll be containers and something will look really sickly and the client's like, but I'm watering it, the water runs out all the time right away. And really what they're looking at is the soil's dried out, whether they forgot for several days or they weren't really watering enough all the time and slowly, you know, over a period of weeks or a couple of months, that interior area dried out. Well, then you've got all those air bubbles in between the dirt and the soil in there. And as water comes in, it's pushing it away. So the water often goes to the edges and slides out the bottom, but really it's still dry in there. And you can find out how dry it is really by using your finger or a chopstick or some other little device, tool. Just scratch the top, even ½ inch of soil. Usually you'll see, oh, it's still dry. You thought you watered it. If that's the case, it's an investment of time and energy to get that rehydrated. So go ahead and poke around in the soil a little bit. You're going to water, let that get absorbed. You're going to water again. You're going to poke some more. It can take, for a big container like with citrus, it could take 15 minutes of really trying to make sure the water's been absorbed and gotten in there. It can bring back a lot of plants if you do it thoroughly. So it's really better. You always want to make sure that there's moisture at least 1 inch down. You know, the top can get dry, but 1 inch down, you want to make sure there's some sign of moisture in the soil. If your irrigation's erratic, that shows up in, you know, with edibles, things like the blossom rot or ill-shaped zucchini. It can also make cucumbers bitter. I'm sure it affects flower production, but I don't have any specific examples. But again, so you want to try to be consistent in your watering. As I mentioned, succulents do need water. I think weekly in the summer. And this is another problem where they get so dried out that you go to water them and it runs right through. They're used to sort of grabbing what they can, but I think weekly when it's hot is nice, maybe monthly in autumn, and certainly none in the winter. Besides it being cold, the moisture just doesn't go anywhere. It's better to not get the water on the leaves when it's cold or when there's hot direct sun. I mean, better if you're going to do it from overhead, if it's a really densely packed container, you know, maybe early morning when the sun's still mild and it all evaporates, that would probably be the best time. And then this is a resource for edibles. It's with the UC Master Gardeners group for this county and San Francisco County. If you go to our front page, there's one on gardening resources that you have to look up. And once you go to gardening resources, here's here on the left, there's this whole list of things for information. And one of the really great ones is vegetables, herbs, and fruit. And from there, you have a choice. I just picked one of the calendars of when to plant your items, whether it should be a transplant, so it's already, you know, sprouted, or if you can still grow it from seed. So this is a great thing for edibles. Nowadays, there's so many people doing cutting gardens. I don't have a specific source, but I'm sure that there's information out there that you can get. So if you've got things in a pot, long term, you want to turn it every quarter, or at least every, 6 months, so that you can get sun and it grows evenly all around. That's really important. If it's a thicker leafed plant, or you're in a particularly dusty, dirty area, you really want to rinse the leaves off. They can't breathe too well when they're covered in dirt and dust. And actually that becomes sort of a happy home for certain mites and that kind of thing. So I'm not saying you should be out there with a little towel and wiping them down, which we do when a plant is really bad. But I think if they just get a spritz every once in a while, monthly, it doesn't have to be all the time, they would be happier for it. Fertilize as needed. You don't want to go super crazy because they have a limited space to grow in. So it might be for ongoing that it's better just to do half strength fertilizer. There are a lot of factors: what you're growing, how big's the pot, what you're trying to accomplish. But you might fool around with that maybe sort of half strength or half quantity might do just as well. In fact, over fertilizing, like usually it's more with the chemical ones that aren't organic, that provide this super fast hyper growth, they tend to produce the weak stems, the weak growth, which is super attractive to aphids and other pests. So everybody kind of wins with the slow and steady approach. Root pruning. If you've got a bush, tree, whatever, you need to take it out, and every couple of years, either put it in a bigger pot or root prune it. And that's really just slicing, the sides, maybe an inch all around, maybe an inch off the bottom, kind of shaking out some of the old dirt, putting in all new dirt, putting it back either in the same pot. If you've done that, that'll work. Or if you want to go to a bigger pot and you don't really want to cut all the roots off, you still want to really give them a good breaking up and loosening. If you don't do that, things that have already gotten kind of root bound and grown in circles or all into themselves, they never really start to reach out into the new soil. So you need to do something with that. I'm going to go to the last one. Harvest your crops, harvest your flowers, whatever it is. The more you cut them, the more you get. A plant's whole goal in life is to produce seed and propagate the species. So if it sets a bunch of, let's say the green bean plant sets a whole bunch of green beans and they all go to seed because nobody's harvesting them, it's like, I'm done. Whereas if they keep getting pulled off, the bean plant's like, okay, I got to keep going till I get some in the ground, out there, wherever out there is, and like that cognizant, but and a lot of the flowers we like to cut will produce more flowers if you cut them. Not all, but you know, it's something worth doing. And then the Master Gardeners, I think I have I have their connection here. Master Gardeners are really a good resource for questions. We used to have walk-in where you could take something to Redwood City and Half Moon Bay. Obviously with COVID, we don't have that, but you can email them pictures and your problem, and somebody takes your questions and researches it and gets back to you on that. So that last email is really great. The IPM UC Davis is a good place to find out about pests and diseases and good, you know, healthy ways to manage those. I am a big fan, even before talking here at the library. I've always thought the public library has a great collection, especially because you can get it from so many different branches. So there's a lot of really good books out there. Sunset's the old tried and true for this area, and they have a lot of good information, but there are many more. The Golden Gate Gardening book by Pam Pierce is 12 years old now, probably. But it's still kind of the best book on when to plant edible things when. In fact, the calendar I showed you is very similar to some of the stuff she has. So it's just a good book. And then, you know, independent nurseries tend to have people who work at them who are gardeners or have been in the business for a while and are experienced. And so I really like the independent nurseries. And I know it's expensive, but, you know, it's nice when you can support them. Nobody's getting rich. The growers, you know, it's costing them more money. The gas to truck it up here is costing more money. It all just seems to go up. But those people usually in the independent nurseries, at least somebody on staff has been there for years, has a real interest in diagnosing problems, that kind of thing. So I like that about them. And I always show these 3 bugs down here because it's kind of like, how do you know, you can't judge a bug by its beauty. And the first bug on the left is actually a ladybug larva. And you would never know that, because how you get a ladybug out of that, I don't know, but that is great. It eats a lot of aphids. The one in the middle also eats a lot of aphids, a soldier beetle. And then the other 2, and I guess, you know, the clue is that there's a hole in the leaf, are cucumber and bean beetles. And they not only eat holes in your beans and cucumbers and stuff, they transmit a lot of disease pathogens around. So they are, although they're kind of like cute little yellow ladybugs, they're actually really bad guys. So, you know, do your research. I think if you do have a pest problem, there are a lot of easy ways to manage it without going to chemicals first. If you can get that right balance, then you get the ladybug larva and all those guys who help take care of your bad pest problems. So it's, you know, try to find the least dramatic way to deal with them. And sometimes the least dramatic way is to go out there and wipe them off, you know, wear a pair of rubber gloves, put the hose on low, wash it off, or, you know, snip back a little piece that's got a problem. Sometimes that's just the easiest way to do it. Now, I know there are, I'll leave it here for a minute. I remember a few questions, and then Jenna can jump in. So some people are on the coast and asked, you know, it's hard over there to grow things they might want to. They don't have the sun and it's colder. Can you grow them inside? The answer is maybe, and that's not very helpful. But what you need, the warmth you could bring inside, but you also need the sun. And you're not going to get enough sun through the window because you don't have enough sun. Presumably that's one of the problems. So you could use grow lights, but you want grow lights with the full spectrum. And it's kind of tricky. I'm not an expert on this. I'm not even a intermediate on this, advanced beginner, but you don't want just regular lights or LED lights. You want ones that have the full red, blue spectrum for all the things they need for growth. So if you wanted to bring in and grow vegetables, well, yeah, you could do it, but you'd have to sort of set up almost a, a production area. That said, I will, I've got some sunny windows and I sometimes still buy the basil plants in October and November and try to keep them going for a couple of months. So you can do that kind of thing. It's just, it's kind of tricky. I'm more a fan of, putting it in a pot, maybe with wheels underneath, following the sun over the different months as it may change, and trying to keep it in areas with stone or, cement or whatever, where you're going to get that residual heat. You're not going to get the sun, but you're going to get more heat than as if it was out in the ground or an unprotected area. Jenna, do you want to tell me, I don't remember all the other questions at the moment. I just remembered that one. If there's some other ones that people have.
Sure. Let me see. First question was from a couple people. Are coffee grounds, eggshells, and tea grounds, are they good for plants?
They can be. I know that, I forget the name of the place. There is somebody who grows, is that Love Apple? There's a place that sells a lot of tomato plants and they have a recipe which includes putting eggshells and all this stuff in the soil to help grow great tomatoes. It takes a while for the eggshells to break down to get into the soil to turn into something the plants can use. So yeah, they're all great things to use, but they're a slower term thing. They don't show up instantly. And in fact, coffee grounds, they can acidify a little bit, but even that, I think it takes a lot of coffee to really turn your soil acidic. So if you wanted to, you could. If you're worried about it, you're not putting tons of coffee on them, then I wouldn't worry about it too much. So.
Another question about using grow bags for growing food versus plastic pots. Which is better and does it matter?
I don't think that it matters. Size is really what is one thing that matters. The grow pots, the fabric ones, I only did this once and it's been a while ago. I think there's a lot of moisture evaporation with them. And so that would be my concern with those. And they aren't, I'm not sure I've seen them big enough to do something bigger than say a small, some of the smaller things. So that now it could be fun though for something like potatoes. So yeah, I mean, they're fine. If they were made for growing plants, then I would say they're fine. I would not make my own grow bag with material that I don't know how it's been bleached or printed.
I think someone in the chat said the farm or nursery that you were talking about just now, was it Love Apple Farm and Cynthia Gueski?
I don't know if it was, I don't know who it was, but I remember it was Love Apple Farm, and I know they have tremendous success. I just remember taking that information to some, I think, master gardeners and saying, well, what do you think about, this? Because there was, there's the whole, like, put a fish head in it and put the an aspirin, and I'm not sure what the aspirin's supposed to do, but there have been a lot of recipes, and I'm not sure that they advocated aspirin, but I want to say they might have advocated fish head, but you can get what they basically said was it's never going to decompose enough and turn into something that plant can use. So that soil might be great the next time around or 3 months later, but while you're growing that thing now, it just takes too long. So that was the bottom line on that. Yeah.
Another question, are there Master Gardeners available at farmers markets? And if so, which ones?
Oh, golly. There used to be, now the COVID thing has changed everything, unfortunately. There used to be, and I can't remember, I will, usually the front of the Master Gardener website might say where some of those public outreach are, because it used to be that the first Sunday of every month, there was a Master Gardener at the San Mateo Arboretum that sat there and did, people could come bring stuff. And I did hear them say that they still have someone who comes periodically because they help the Arboretum plant sales people periodically. So I guess they still have that public thing. I'll try to find out, and you can add it maybe to this, or we'll figure it out.
Okay, we have lots of questions. I've noticed that succulents can get really tall over time and eventually expose their stem. Are they supposed to be replanted, or should I just leave it?
That's an aesthetic thing and potentially a structural thing, because I suppose in a good winter, can tip your pot or whatever. That's how they grow. You can cut, take them out and cut them, let them callus over a couple days and stick them back in. I wouldn't overwater them, but you want to, water the soil back in. They should reroot. I have had luck on occasion where maybe the flower, or it's not a flower, the succulent head has been knocked off, the plant's still sitting there in the soil, where then it sometimes sends out plants off the sides, the blossoms or whatever, the flower heads of the like aeoniums off the sides. But you can cut back succulents. It's just a matter of, you really should let the fresh area get a little dry hard before you put it back in. Yeah, because they can, the moisture can get in there and then it can get mushy. And you don't want to, wherever you put it back into, you don't want it to be mushy. You want there to have been some moisture, but then you kind of want to let it be on the low moisture side. So it can look for that, start to want to look for that water. And then once you feel like it's dried up enough on that end, you can add water periodically to make it want to grow.
Okay. Question about fertilizer, liquid versus pellets, which are better for flowers?
Well, so I like dry fertilizer generally when I'm planting, to put it all in there. If you're growing something like as a crop, a flower, possibly, then as it's going, it may be that the dried stuff, it's getting to be 2 months have gone by, it's going great, but now you've got another month or two of growth. I do go to liquid sometimes just to keep it happy and going along. I find that liquid doesn't last so long in the soil, so it's sort of a short-term boost or help, as opposed to something that's kind of always there for it to access. That said, organic fertilizer usually takes well, I don't know. It takes you know, it might take a couple weeks to fully be accessible. The starters, I guess why I like those is because the humic acids are immediately available to the roots, but all that other stuff that's in there kind of has to work with the amoeba and the bacteria before the roots are really using it. So there is a little slow delay there. It's better for the plant that there's a slow delay. The liquid ones, I wouldn't do full strength all the time. I think that's probably a little bit too much. And then if you're doing, say, half strength, you've got to remember to do that every time. But again, it doesn't stay in the soil as long. So I use it as, well, what I would say is start with the dry. If you think you need to give it a little perk up or continue a growing season, then add the liquid. Or if you forgot to add the dry and you're getting to a crucial point in its development, go ahead and do the liquid. But you have to do the liquid more often and, you know, kind of follow up and just know that that's your commitment. I also don't know that the liquids have as wide a range of benefits in them. You could get actively aerated compost tea from Lingso, which is a little bit of a is awesome. I will say is amazing stuff, but they don't make it all the time, and you have to have water that's dechlorinated, and there's a process to it. So I also think that the liquid's probably a more limited plate of nutrition.
Question about if you start with seeds in smaller containers like you get from a nursery, when do you transplant it to a larger pot, or do you recommend starting the seeds already in the larger containers?
Is this a specific plant?
No mention of what plant.
Okay. So starting seeds, I don't recommend. Well,
oh, sorry, vegetables or fruits, they said.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So some vegetables can be grown in the long-term pot, like beans, which don't really like to be transplanted. Probably cucumbers and zucchini too. But the medium for seed starting is a little different than potting soil. So you might want to start them in the smaller containers with the seed starting material. I don't know if it holds moisture more, or what the difference is. I just know it's a different texture and medium. So I'd say a lot of things you probably want to start in smaller and then put in bigger. Now, if you're doing like a tomato or a pepper and you start it in the little things, you don't then need to go to a 4-inch to a 1 gallon to a 10 gallon. As soon as you get it to whatever is big enough, maybe more than one, but you probably out of the seed starting little cell might put it in a 4-inch thing to get it going. Once it's sort of matured in that, you want to put it in its final home. You don't need to be graduating up to that. But there are things like, any of the root kind or tuber kind of things, carrots, beets, you want to do in the pot. A lot of greens you can do in the final pot, lettuces, all of that. You want to make sure birds don't get to them. So you might want to, sometimes I just use actually I do two things. If it's cold, I have old gallon milk containers, and I cut the bottom off, and then I put them on top, and I don't have the cap on so the air goes. So that actually is like a little greenhouse for them to germinate in, and it protects them from the birds. The other thing is, you might want to put like an old tomato cage over it and throw some netting or something, just because birds like those little seedlings.
Hopefully we can get through at least a couple more questions before it's time. This one is about spider plants. My spider plant roots came out from the bottom of a plastic container, grew and wrapped around it. It's thriving well, but is there any way to replant it without harming the plant, or is it a forgiving plant?
I think they're probably forgiving. I'm not super familiar with them. I mean, I know what they are, but I don't grow them. If it's a plastic pot, did she say plastic? I would cut the plastic pot and try to cut down a side. Well, you could do a couple things. Either cut through to a couple of holes, whether you use like a serrated bread knife or a little saw or sturdy scissors. We've done that kind of thing to try to at least tease it out. I suspect it's probably pretty forgiving. And you know what? Sometimes it's just go for it and see.
There's another question. I don't know if you know the answer for this, but someone's had the drip lines chewed by critters. Do you think it could be gophers or moles?
Not moles. Could be gophers, could be squirrels, could be voles, with a V, and they are mice without a tail. And they live sometimes in old gopher tunnels or around. That's a pain. Your best bet, and also this is true for like gardeners with weed whackers. If you can, if it's outside the pot, you could put the line in like a piece of, either PVC or flexible line, basically protect it. If it's in the pot already, I might bury it in the pot, because you can put that line an inch under, and then maybe it would be less likely to, chew it. Or sprinkle garlic, cinnamon, some of those kind of things make those animals avoid it. No guarantee, but
maybe let's do one more question.
I'm happy to, yeah.
So someone is talking about they're living in an apartment and started container growing for vegetables and fruits.
Mm-hmm.
Do you recommend a grow tent with grow lights?
Oh, well, I don't, sure, why not? I mean, that's an investment. If you're going to do that, I've never used a grow tent, but sure. I would say definitely give it a try.
Yeah, they had said they started off the seedlings in a window to get sunlight, but then after they transplant it, it might be too cool in the room. So that's why they were asking about the tent.
Yeah, no, the tent, I mean, that makes sense. I'm going to guess heat is heat. It's the light waves that matter. So
since that was a quick answer, let's squeeze in one of the last questions is, how often do you have to add nutrients into the containers for growing food? And can that be accurately checked using the pH soil level checker?
No. You know what, you kind of read whatever the instructions are on whatever brand you use. Otherwise, the plant shows you signs. For example, if there's, so this one with the blossom rot, that can be irrigation problems. That can also be that it hasn't accessed calcium, although sometimes the reason it has excess calcium is because there's too much or not enough water. But I mean, usually the plant gives you hints if it's deficient. But generally, if you follow the packaging, I will say citrus sometimes need some extra iron, just to keep them happy. So, yeah.
The other part of the question was, is there a better way to be sure that there's sufficient nutrients? So the answer was based on the plant. Right?
The plant, you just look at the plant. Yeah. I mean, if it's got the color leaves, it should. If it's producing what it should, if it's got good vigor, as long as you fertilize, if the package says every 2 to 3 months, then you do it every 2 to 3 months if that's what you want. The other thing is, I I do remember somebody asked about, you need to replace the soil, and generally, yeah, I mean, after years you need to, and for vegetables, heavy feeders, well, first of all, you need to clean those pots. You're not supposed, you can't, you're supposed to clean out like your tomato pots, because you could have a pathogen one year from the next. If your plant hasn't had a pathogen, and this is not official Master Gardener or whatever, but if your plant was healthy and it grew, and then, it's the end of the season, you got rid of it. I throw some of the old dirt in my garden and put new dirt in, but I don't actually use the 10% bleach thing. I'm rolling the dice with that, but you do want to do new soil. And then for something that's been in for a long time, like a lemon or something, especially if you can't take it out, you might want to sprinkle a half or a quarter inch of compost on the top, not as much to be like a mulch problem choking the trunk, but Linkso has beautiful finished compost, and that will help kind of revive the soil a bit.
So it's 5:33. I think we can maybe head out. Thank you for the awesome presentation. I was taking some notes too, because I have a balcony and containers.
Oh, well, good.
Yes. Yes. So thank you. I will post the recording once it's edited. I will send it to Laurel and everyone who registered today.
Okay, and I'm sorry if your questions didn't get asked. I would say, I would contact the Master Gardeners, and probably somebody would get back. It takes a few days. They aren't there every day, but it's a good resource, so you should check that out.
And we've had a couple asks for the slides, so I don't know if you're able to share those slides with us as well.
Yeah, no, okay. That's fine. I'm happy to share the slides. Do I send them to you?
Oh yeah, just send them to me, and then I'll send it to everyone.
Okay, yeah, I'll send a PDF, and then you can send them out.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Thanks. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Laurel.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
Have a good day. Take care.
Bye.